Okay, so this is going to be a video about where is the best place on a gas mask to have the filter intake, because as far as I'm aware I've not done a video on this before and I think it'd be quite an interesting subject to talk about. Now, there's at least two types of filter placements where I definitely don't have a mask that has it. Now, one is I've seen pictures of a prototype British light anti-gas respirator where the filter port was actually directly on the forehead, so it looks a bit like a unicorn, you know, a unicorn's horn. That's the only mask I've ever seen with a filter intake directly on the forehead of the mask, and the reason for that, I assume, is that they've realised it wouldn't work with helmets or anything like that, you know, so that's probably why they didn't do that again. And some US World War II masks, and maybe there's been more masks like this, had a system where there was a hose that went into each side of, I think, the cheeks of the mask, and then the filter canister was kind of on the hose around the person's back, you know, like the back of their neck. And I've not seen that on many masks either, so I guess there were faults with those sort of systems. That one doesn't actually sound too bad a system to me, to be honest, but I'm sure there was problems found with it. So in this video we're going to be looking at, obviously, filters that go roughly at the front of the mask. With this one I'm going to use this to demonstrate filters that pretty much go straight in front, anywhere to straight below, because there's quite a few masks which just have like this kind of port slightly further forwards or backwards depending on the mask, and filters that go obviously on either cheek. Not the actual cheek filters, because I'm just going to cover this about sort of 60 and 40mm masks. And for the sake of fairness, I will say that when I'm doing all these masks and showing you them, we're going to use the same filter for all the masks. Now, if there's little exceptions to this, I'll explain why at the time. Now, what is the advantage of having a forward-facing filter? Well, it's not going to get in the way of cheek welding with a rifle. So if I was to be, you know, trying to shoot a rifle or a gun, I could cheek weld on either side. Now, obviously, with the drinking tube on this mask, that means that that could get in the way, the connector for that. But in general, it's not going to be a problem because the filter is directly in front of the mask. If we attach it, as you can see, the filter is here. So if I get the mask on now, you'll actually see that you know, the filter's not going to be a problem if I was to be cheek welding. So, if I was leaning that way, obviously it would work, you know, minus the drinking tube being annoying, and if I was left-handed shooter and doing it that way, it would work as well. Now, a disadvantage to this system is you can't look down fully. The filter on the mask will block you, and depending on its position, that could be better or worse. Now, on some masks, like the 4A1, where the filter sits even further forwards, you might see a bit of the filter in your vision, so you might have a bit of your vision cut off by the filter, but that's not a problem on this mask. As you can see, main disadvantage to this system is I think you can't really look down very well. See, it constantly hits my chest if I try and look down too much. That's probably not the end of the world, but you know, if you're in an NBC scenario and you had to be careful not to step in puddles or something of mustard gas, you might want to look down. And this mask gives you a problem with something like that. So, overall this is not a bad system for where the filter is mounted. I can't really complain about it too much. Lots of masks have had filters mounted, you know, somewhere on the front, and it works well. It's an old system and it works. Now, the other advantage to a system like this, it works very well with hoses. So if you had a hose screwed into the mask, like so, you could have this attached to a much bigger filter in a backpack, well not a backpack, but you know, like a gas mask satchel. The satchel supports the weight of the filter, which means the mask feels a lot lighter. You could probably look down a bit better with a hose, because it's flexible. And, you know, that all works well. So I'm not going to actually attach a filter to the hose, but just to demonstrate. As you can see, I can now look a bit further down. The exhale valve on this mask will still block me from totally looking down. But otherwise, this is a good system. Obviously it's making that noise again. The reason being is just there's not enough air resistance. So it's not a thing unique to Soviet masks or anything. That happens with lots of masks if you have a hose without a filter on the end. It's simply an air resistance thing. So, let me get this back off. So again, this system is actually fairly good. Now, if you're having a hose on the mask, you definitely don't really want it on a mask with a left or right cheek filter. Not cheek filter, but you know, like a filter that goes on the cheeks. If you think an S10, an FM12, any of those kind of masks. The reason being that I'll try and demonstrate this with this mask. I won't put it on, but let's say you have your hose there or something like that. The issue is that it's not a very good angle. Now, I have seen some hoses which are like set off at a 90-degree angle that are designed for masks like that, but primarily nobody really seems to use those, because obviously the disadvantage is that the hose is kind of having to twist at an awkward angle. So the advantages to a mask like this is very easy for mounting a hose and a big filter and a satchel if you want to. You can have a filter directly on the mask. It shouldn't interfere with cheek welding. The disadvantages are if the filter is up too high or too low, it might interfere with your head movements, either looking down, or your eyesight might be obstructed by the filter being right at the front. Alright, so another disadvantage is if the filter is on the mask in this sort of position, the weight of the filter can actually pull the mask down a bit weirdly. But I'd say this is preferential to the filter being a weight on one side of the mask, pulling the mask to one side. So in general, these masks are still better for sort of filter balance, because if the filter is somewhere centralised, it's not pulling your head to one side or the other. So overall, I would say masks that take the filter somewhere like evenly on the front, whether it be up a bit higher or down a bit lower, are good because they work well with hoses, although I think if the hose is about that far up, it might not work as well. But in general, these sort of masks work well with hoses because the hose can go somewhere you know, where it's going to be out of the way, and it works in a satchel. They're not too bad with filters on. Obviously a bulky filter will prevent you from looking down properly, but otherwise I'd say it's actually a very good system having a mask where the filter is somewhere in the middle of the mask, because I think it has more advantages than disadvantages, to be honest. Right, to demonstrate side-loading filters, let's get out the good old S10. Now, side-loading filters definitely goes as far back as light anti-gas respirators and the American M9 and other World War II US masks, where they were sort of starting to develop that concept. Maybe there's even older masks that did it as well. But the advantage to a side-loading mask is obviously that if you have the filter on the non-dominant shooting side, you can still cheek weld absolutely fine with the mask. You'll notice that most masks are designed for people that are right-handed, although you can get them in variants. And you can get some versions now where they include a blanking plug of the mask, so you put the filter on each side, you know, the side you want, and then the side you shoot from, you put the blanking plug on. And some people even want two filters on their mask, which has advantages and disadvantages that I've covered before in another video. The main advantage primarily being the filters are going to last longer because you have two filters and you can breathe easier because you know, the air is coming through two sources, not coming through one source. The main disadvantage is when it runs out, you're probably going to have two filters running out at once, and as well it's going to be more weight and bulk to the mask. So let's look at a mask like this. So what are the advantages primarily to having this? Obviously, as said, if you're shooting and you're right-handed, this isn't going to get in the way. However, a big disadvantage is, as you might be able to see me holding it, unlike with the other mask, it's now pulling the weight of the mask to one side, where if it's a particularly heavy filter that can be annoying, but as said, for this video, for the sake of this video, we're using the same filter on the masks, just to kind of make it a bit fairer, because it would be unfair to, if I then, you know, got a lightweight plastic filter out for the S10 and said, see, oh, it doesn't matter at all. So let's get the S10 on. So there we go, that's on, and fairly comfortable, but as said, you can definitely feel a bit of weight pulling the mask to one side. Now, on a mask like the S10 with good build quality, this isn't too much of an issue because the mask still sits well on your face. However, with a mask like the Soviet PMG, this definitely becomes a problem. The reason being that because the PMG is made of a much softer rubber, being a latex, and it doesn't have like a plastic or metal bit there to actually reinforce it, the filter starts doing this to the mask and like pulling it, both pulling the mask and kind of making you think, oh, is that going to rip something? So, not a great system when it's, you know, on the cheaper made mask. Now, you can look down fairly well with a mask like this, because obviously the filter is not going to be directly in your sort of line of sight, if you like, when you look down. Well, you know, blocking when you're looking down. It's also not in your line of sight. I can't see the filters on there at all. I can obviously see it on the camera viewfinder, and I can feel it easily enough. When it comes to swapping filters out on a mask, I don't really have a preference. I find as long as you're familiar with how the mask operates, when it actually bites, it's not too hard to do each filter, but basically what you want to do is whatever mask you get, you want to practice changing the filter on the particular mask you plan on using. For me, I end up doing it on several masks, so I'm not as good as if I only had one mask, because remember I collect masks primarily, and then I have a couple set up for use, but I'm not somebody who just buys one mask and then trains with that mask, which is what I'd recommend you do if you want a mask for a survival scenario. So, what are some other advantages of this system? Well, I guess it's not going to be in the way of a voice diaphragm or valves or anything like that, but that's not really a major advantage. But as I said, a disadvantage, I'll demonstrate the hose one to you now. Let's say I was to put this hose on the mask. Just make sure it threads in well enough. As you can see, there's kind of unnecessary room there where the hose just takes up an extra bit of space where it wouldn't if it was coming from directly below or the front area of the mask. And if you pull the hose tight, you can see it's starting to pull the mask to a side. But again, you could use a hose with it, and as I said, I have seen hoses where they have like a plastic solid bit and then the hose mounts to the plastic solid bit to go directly down. So maybe a hose system like that would actually be a good idea if you're going to use something like that. So, as I said, these masks with side-loading filters I think are primarily a good design as well. I think all my go-to masks would actually be this sort of design, to be honest, so I probably slightly prefer them, but that's because with lots of modern filters they don't weigh too much, they weigh less than this. You know, and you can have it directly on the side of the mask. So, as I said, this video is not really going to convince you either way, I think, because I think both systems can be quite good, and it depends a lot of the time on the mask's individual quality. But hopefully this has kind of summed up some of the points about the advantages of, you know, having a filter on the side or having a filter on the front or below. Again, I think it's going to depend more, are you interested in using a bigger filter in a satchel or supporting the weight of a filter in a satchel and using the mask with a hose? If so, I would always go with the masks that have the filter port directly underneath or kind of in the chin area, because if you are having a hose in those areas it's not going to get in the way as much. Whereas if you've got a mask, you know, like I said, the side, the hose doesn't suit that. Again, you can probably buy a specialised hose for those masks, but you know, with a generic gas mask 40mm hose, you're just going to want it, you know, to attach to really anywhere on the front of the mask like that. If you're planning on using the mask though with 40mm lightweight filters, I'd say just get any other kind of masks that you like which have side-loading filters. Probably not a Soviet PMG though, for reasons I've covered, but you know, any of the Avon modern masks, things like the Canadian C3 or that 60mm, you know, Canadian C4, US M40, Forshida masks. It really doesn't matter, you know, they're all very good build quality masks. Now, I haven't got it out for this video because I'm not sure exactly where it is. Well, I kind of know, but I'd have to dig it out. The other system is like what the BEM 4GP has, but that's kind of unique to one mask. I think there maybe is an Italian mask that does it as well, where it's the filter port mounts like there, and it's a twistable filter port, so you can have the filter either on the left, right, or bottom. Now, in the bottom position it would be very good with a hose, in the side positions it would be very good with a regular 40mm filter. But as I said, it was only the BEM 4GP and I think maybe one other mask that's used that system, so it's probably not worth covering it in detail, because unless you're buying that mask, the system is going to be irrelevant. Because a lot of people have worries of a system like that they're going to have air leaking because something's going to break on the movable bit. But there you go. Hopefully this has covered you know, having a filter mounted either below or on the sides, which is better. My personal preference is probably like this, but again, I could happily go with either, and I think in a survival scenario where you're concerned about your life, it's not going to be a massive issue either way. You're just going to put up with it really, because you know, put up with a fairly uncomfortable mask if it meant saving your life. So there you go. Side loading versus bottom loading filters. I'd say it primarily comes down to, are you using it with a hose, yes or no, and then pick accordingly.